going to talk a little bit about some of the most influential editorials that the Wall Street Journal has published. And I think in Paul's experience and mine, that means we probably need to start with Ronald Reagan's tax revolution in the early 1980s. We were there at the creation, Paul.
Yeah, it was something of an economic policy revolution. It was the restoration of what we like to call pro-growth economics, or classical economics as understood before the 100 years or the 70 years of Keynesian-dominated economics. And the seminal editorial there was 1983, January 1, where we said, at last, a tax cut, because that is when the Reagan tax cuts hit.
The next big event for us was the presidency of Bill Clinton. And we began that presidency in 1992 with a very famous editorial called "Who is Bill Clinton?" asking every 4 years or so, the Democratic Party sends us another Southern governor to get used to. And did we ever get used to him? Over 8 years, we published endless editorials about Clinton's conduct of the presidency. And I think the issue for us was the idea that Clinton had put himself ahead of the public purpose of the presidency. He flew under the banner of Whitewater and went through a threat of impeachment at the end of the Clinton presidency when we wrote again, "Who is Bill Clinton?"
Yeah, and I think what we did was we filled the gap that a lot of the press corps simply refused to cover. And a lot of the issues that they didn't write about during his campaign came back to haunt his presidency, much as we had foreseen.
Why don't we talk a little bit about what happened on September 11th, 2001. That was the bombing of the World Trade Center.
That's right, and it revived a preoccupation with foreign policy that had vanished since the fall of for the most part, since the fall of the Cold War. You and I were both there that day, and somehow we managed to get out of paper. But it really shifted not only our focus, but also the focus of the nation. And it was the decisive event in the Bush presidency, and still resonates now. And will for many years, I wager, because of the comeback of al-Qaeda and the jihadists.
Well, that was in the first year of the Bush presidency. It immediately transformed it into a war presidency.
That's right.
And I think whatever George Bush thought he might have intended to do when he was president, he ended up leading the war on terrorism. 2008. November, the financial crisis.
Right, the financial crisis, which exploded in September of 2008. And again, we're dealing with the consequences of it in terms of misbegotten economic policy. I think a couple of we didn't predict everything that went wrong in that crisis, but we did get a couple of things right. One, I'm very proud of our writing about the Federal Reserve and its excess monetary policy and money creation, which created incentives for excessive credit, but also an editorial called Fannie Mae Enron about Fannie Mae,
which appeared in 2002, 6 years before the financial crisis.
And was a consistent theme for us all along about the excesses of housing and how we had subsidized housing and created these big monsters which had so much of the housing market risk embedded in them, and that if they failed, they could catalyze a much larger crisis, which they did.
Let's talk a little bit about what we've all been doing the last 5 years, or at least 4 of those last 5 years. Flies under the title of Obamacare, named after our current president.
Yeah, and the editorial.
We spend a lot of time on these projects.
We've read many editorials. We've written many editorials over these years on it, because I think it's 1/6 of the economy, rewriting it, transforming the economy, as the president says. And I think this is so central to his mission, and so central to, I think, to some of our economic problems now, that it deserves an enormous amount of attention. And when it passed, we called it the Obamacare crossroads. And what we did was I think, said, you know what? Now that it's law, let's see how it works, and we'll have a test. And of course, we've seen many of the things we predicted come true. And I think in large part, ultimately, in substantial part, this will be replaced. Not maybe repealed totally, but replaced.
You know, I think there's one final thing to say here, Paul, about the idea of the journal's most influential editorials. The nature of our business is such that really it isn't just one editorial. It is a succession of editorials on all these subjects. That's the nature of our business. We do it every day, just as we have been for 125 years. With luck, you and I in here won't be here for another 125 years, but the Wall Street Journal will.
And sometimes it takes many, many years before you see the fruits of your labors.